So guys, the crypto markets are dumping right now. I pretty much talked about it a few days ago. A lot of people were talking about how we're just ranging, but I was anticipating these crashes and you should too. The headlines, guys, talking about how Trump and the China, trade war that's taking place. We knew some key events were going to be happening this week with pretty much the Fed, inflation, and a few things revolved around the GDP with the United States. And right now, everything is not looking too hot, especially with escalations and how the futures are starting to look based off of the news events with China and the US and a lot of other different things. Guys, the markets are dumping quite significantly, and I want to give you guys all this information, and we're going to jump into exactly what you need to be aware of. But if you're new to my channel, check out the rest of my content and keep you guys updated with the day-to-day events, price action around Bitcoin, Ethereum, altcoins, how liquidity is shifting, and exactly what you need to be aware of so that you are, positioned correctly. At the beginning of the week, I talked about the key events that were happening this week, and I told you pretty much buckle up that at the end of the week, we're really going to be seeing if we're going to be closing good, closing bad. And, the market's closed pretty good, but we're seeing a lot of mixed sentiment with headlines with Trump and China and this trade war and also the inflation data that came out, which has all eyes on the Fed. So with all that being said, guys, let's go to jump into the straight price action, the news events that are having an effect, and let's cut out all of the fluff. So with all that being said, let's jump straight into it. So guys, like how I said, the crypto markets are dumping quite significantly right now. Everyone was talking about how we're just ranging, but no, we are crashing quite significantly based off of the macroeconomic events that are having a huge effect. And this is why it's super important to keep up with not only the price action, but the news events that have an effect on liquidity. And I keep you guys updated with all that information. We talked about it at the beginning of the week. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you subscribe, like, and make sure you share with anybody that actually wants to progress in the crypto space. But Ethereum right now is ranging, dropping down quite significantly, and I think we might honestly be dropping down to that 98,000 region based off of previous zones and overall imbalances that we currently saw back in February. But currently, Bitcoin is sitting at around 103,852. Everyone thinks, based off of what we're currently seeing, we're going to be seeing a little bit more deviations before we rip back up. Ethereum is following the price action as well, currently sitting at around 25.11, and these assets, guys, are creating a higher lows right now, which is still very bullish, but we need to see the continuation with the news events that are coming out, and also how the Fed is going to be cutting rates, how liquidity is going to be shifting into the markets, and multiple other different things. But altcoins right now, guys, are not looking good. Altcoins are dumping down quite significantly. So if you're an altcoin investor, you are feeling the pain, and the best thing you can do, guys, is wait for liquidity to shift back into the right assets whenever macroeconomic events are looking good, whenever the Fed starts to cut rates and we start to see everything, drop down. This is going to be super important, but right now separates the strong from the weak. Do not capitulate your bag. Understand that we're going to be seeing these dips because people feel, mixed sentiment. People feel like everything's over, a recession is coming, but this is where it's super important to keep up with the, news events that are coming out and how it's having an effect and how to position yourself around it. But right now, Bitcoin dominance, guys, is shooting up. We saw a little bit of a deviation with this chart whenever we started to see some, news events coming out with China and Trump, which is really causing a lot of the fluctuations in the market and the Fed. But right now, Bitcoin dominance is shooting right back up, really points to the fact that people are hedging a lot of their bets, getting out of altcoins, jumping back into Bitcoin. And also, USDT dominance also saw a crazy recovery, pointing to the fact that sentiment is shifted. People are very uncertain. They're not sure about what's going to be happening, so they're moving their money into stable coins. This is why I keep you guys updated with the information around Bitcoin, Ethereum, altcoins with the total 3 chart, and then Bitcoin dominance in USDT. We can see how liquidity shifts, and then from there position ourselves correctly. But right now, sentiment is not looking too hot. Now, what is causing all of the shifts? The news events, guys, that were coming out around Trump, the tariffs, and honestly some new updates around a few different tariffs as well. And right now there's also mixed sentiment with the agreements that China and the US had, and pretty much the break of these negotiations and exactly what is happening in between it. So right now we saw some updates from the Kobesi letter 14 hours ago, pretty much just stemming from the beginning of the day. President Trump says China has totally violated its agreement with us. In an appeal breakdown of the trade deal, Trump says, "So much for being Mr. Nice Guy. Did the US-China trade deal just collapse?" So this is causing a lot of fluctuations. Is there even a trade deal in place? Moving into the inflation data that was coming out in this week, which I was also telling you guys about, this is where all eyes are on the Fed now, if they're going to be cutting rates and pulling down so that, liquidity can start to shift back into the markets and everyone can see an ease in the economy. But the April PCE inflation and the Fed's preferred inflation measure falls to the 2.1%, below expectations of 2.2%. Core PCE inflation falls to 2.5%, in line with expectations of 2.5%. PCE inflation is now at its lowest level since September of 2024. All eyes are on the Fed based off of this information and what exactly they're going to be taking action on. But based off of exactly how Trump has been, having his relationship with the Fed, I'm not, too anticipating exactly what's going to be happening, more just wondering what's going to be happening. But breaking also, the U.S. goods imports fall to 19.8% in April as President Trump's reciprocal tariffs effectively halted trade with many countries. This marks the largest drop in history for U.S. goods imports. So this is not also looking good for overall the trade imports and what the U.S. usually sees. On today's episode of the Trade War, jumping more into it, this is where the Kobesa letter talks a little bit more about Trump. Effectively just said that the U.S.-China trade deal is not working, and yet stock market futures are down less than 0.3%, which wasn't too crazy. This was followed by the U.S. Trade Representative Greer stating that the U.S. is very concerned with China's non-compliance on trade. And this jumps into the S&P 500 would be down around 5% on this headline. Has the trade war lost its shock effect? But if we jump more into the news events that were coming out later on today, we can see exactly China's U.S. Embassy spokesperson says China has repetitively raised concerns regarding U.S. abuse of export control measures in the semiconductor sector and other related practices. China also urges the U.S. to cease discriminatory restrictions. And then the U.S. is planning wider technology sanctions on China with a wider crackdown on subsidiaries. And then more on top of that, guys, the S&P losses accelerate to -1% as trade tensions with China escalate. So we start to see a little bit of the jump with how the markets are responding. Then WSJ reports that U.S.-China trade deal is at a risk of falling apart over rare earth minerals. So there's multiple things at stake right now. And then we saw positive news around the S&P 500 officially post its best month since November of 2023, rising 6.2%. So this was super bullish based off of, all the negative news events that were coming out. But then President Trump says he is doubling tariffs on steel from 25% to 50%. Nothing like a Friday evening tariff headline minutes after futures close, which this caused a huge fluctuation in the markets, guys, with Trump's, talk about exactly the huge, great honor to raise tariffs both on steel and aluminum from 25 to 50%. A lot of crypto analysts and traders were talking about this and how it's not very, very good. But overall, U.S. Defense Secretary Hegseth says China is credibly preparing to use force to alter balance of power in the region. Hegseth says the threat from China is real and could be imminent. The U.S. appears to be confident that China plans to use force in the near future. This may also explain why tensions have escalated on the trade front over the last 48 hours. It's going to be a busy weekend. So right now, guys, there is a lot of mixed sentiment with China, this trade war, inflation, how the Fed is going to be looking at all this information. And as a result, we're seeing the markets take a huge effect from it. You can see the price action around Bitcoin, Ethereum, altcoins. It all stems, guys, from the macroeconomic events that are fueling liquidity in the market, which is why on this channel, I keep you guys updated with all that information and try to cut out all the other bullcrap narratives that everyone preaches. But Crypto Mission now gives his perspective around this, and I completely agree. It says altcoin rally incoming. The charts may say no, and there's multiple indicators point to the fact that more likely we're going to be seeing that. And this is where you need to be looking at global liquidity, the M2 money supply, overall how price action has looked in previous cycles, and then start to compare that. That's why I'm pretty calm right now, just allocating into my portfolio and waiting for more rips. Right now, jumping into it though, that's the acceleration on Bitcoin. couldn't break back above 106,000, and now the cascade of liquidations happens. This is the dip you'd want to get yourself positioned on Bitcoin and Ethereum. And this is so true. Right now, everyone was getting super euphoric and bullish, but now we're seeing some crashes, deviations for coins. If you have dry powder, allocate to these positions that you truly believe in. Guys, every position that I talk about on this channel, I truly believe in. And whenever we start to see liquidity pour back in, I'm going to be telling you, I freaking told you so. And if you bought, congratulations, I'm shaking your hand. You made some crazy gains with me. But moving into the last perspective on this, he says, I wouldn't be scared at all. So many people are convinced that we are entering a bear market, and I think they'll be massively wrong. And this is so true. Most of the time, guys, whenever we see a bull market take off, everyone thinks a bear market, a recession is about to happen, a black swan event. And more than likely, we're going to be seeing, of course, some deviations, but then from there, we're going to be seeing a massive freaking recovery. But from here, guys, I actually want to jump into my crypto portfolio and exactly how it's looking, just to give you a real perspective from a crypto investor analyst and someone that's not making millions of dollars like all these other crypto YouTubers that you guys freaking watch. I want to be completely real with you. Look at my crypto portfolio. Everything is quite down quite significantly. And this is pretty much based off of the, macroeconomic events that are having an effect with US, the China trade war that's currently taking place, inflation data, and more key events that happened this week. But this is where you need to start looking at this like opportunity and take advantage of these discounts. But swiping everything to the side, guys, right now we have mixed sentiment. We have a lot of headlines coming out. Right now, everyone's anticipating, mixed price action in the weekend based off of exactly what's happening with Trump and the headlines that are coming out. I keep you guys updated with all this information. At the beginning of the week, I made a freaking video talking about how the markets are dumping, and they're probably going to keep on dumping. And a lot of people were saying, hey, we're just trading sideways. It's nothing too much. Guys, if you keep up with the macroeconomic events, you can really understand that, no, we're going to be seeing some deviations, but it's just a matter of understanding it and how to position yourself around it. And on this YouTube channel, I give you guys all that information. And I still only get, a matter of few views because people want to hear somebody that preaches their own narrative and that altcoins are going to rip up and that you're going to be freaking rich. No, if you do not keep up with all of this information, you aren't willing to keep on progressing and overall understand the fluff from the actual true information, you are not going to progress. You are not going to be making money, and more than likely, you are going to liquidate your positions before you see the altcoin season happen, and then you're going to be buying back higher just for somebody like me to dump right back on you. So don't be that person. Make sure you keep up with all this information, and on this channel I do it. So if you're new to my channel, go and check out the rest of my content. I keep you guys updated on the day-to-day information, price action around Bitcoin, Ethereum, altcoins, and pretty much everything else in between so that you can position yourself correctly. Moving into the weekend, I want to talk a little bit more about exactly these news events, what you need to be aware of, my crypto portfolio, and what everyone is talking about. If you guys have any questions or suggestions, drop them down below, and I'll be sure to get to them. But overall, do not capitulate your bag. Stay tuned, and hopefully I catch you guys in the next one. Peace.